Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman. And if you're listening but you want to see us as well as hear us, you can. You just search Electoral Dysfunction on YouTube. And viewers can see that Beth, although you're in a different studio, and although we saw you in the States yesterday, you are here by some miracle and looking as fresh as a daisy. How did that time travelling happen?
Well, Harriet, I did my makeup in Terminal 3 Loos at Heathrow, and I'm glad that you think I did it quite well. The jet lag is real. I've been back and forth to Trump world. We were literally there for 24 hours, and I went with the lobby pack, with the journalists in the lobby, and when we go, we have this WhatsApp group. Someone called it Keir Gets Trumped.
Top trumps, I would say.
Top trumps. He went into the lion's den and he came out not even mauled.
God,
Keir Starmer, who just
how many
thought
puns are we going to have, ladies? Like, we
Well,
started
we're
a
just-
pun a minute. Well, do you know, there are some people that are in electoral dysfunction world, because we've had one of these things that is almost my favourite thing in this podcast, which is when one of our listeners writes in or sends us a voice note to ask us something that we're actually able to answer with first-hand knowledge. And we've had this brilliant question in by email from Annette. And she wrote in to ask you, Beth, if you could ask Donald Trump one question, what would it be? Which seems pretty, appropriate for today, because you actually did get to ask Donald Trump one question. So what was it? And how was it?
Well, that is a good question, Annette. And you're right, I did ask him a question. This is what I asked him in the Oval Office. Have a listen. Mr. President, you obviously can do business with our Prime Minister Keir Starmer. You said that the EU was constructed to screw the US when it comes to trade. What can our Prime Minister say to you to persuade you not to impose tariffs on the United Kingdom?
Yeah, did I use the word that you said, that bad word?
I think so.
Well, I think that the EU, I've had problems with the EU.
I'm in there going, well, I think you said that. And I'm feeling like I've got trumped, and have I misread the quote? Then I'm thinking, oh, God, I said screw in the Oval Office, and he's telling me that's a bad word and I'm going to get cancelled, even though you can't get cancelled in Trump's America anymore.
Come on, Beth, it's the Oval Office. It's not as if people haven't said the word. People have actually had it happen to them. Just ask Monica Lewinsky.
Bloody hell. And then the other thing was, I was like, then this is literally what's going on in my head. I'm like, is screw a swear word? But look, what are we going to do in this podcast? We've got so much to do in this podcast today. Look, we're going to do Labour cutting the aid budget to fund defence spending. Who knew what when? And how has it gone down? Harriet Harman has got the nuts and bolts, the blow-by-blow of what happened inside number 10, which is very sexy, isn't it? Sexy
Well,
number 10, Harriet.
I think what you mean is important in the national interest.
Yeah,
is
sorry.
what you actually mean.
Oh. But before we get into too much of that, we do need to take you back, obviously, to the Donald Trump, Keir Starmer bromance that I never quite expected I would see, but there it was before my very eyes. But Harriet, number one, did you imagine that these two unlikely leaders would form such a bond? And is it partly down to the preparation that Keir Starmer obviously did? Like, how do you prepare to enter the lion's den of Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's all about the preparation. And I think it's what I would describe as calculated spontaneity. I was very anxious when I saw Macron visiting Trump, and they seemed to be sort of frisking each other like at an airport, or like I've seen chimpanzees in London Zoo aiming for supremacy by which chimpanzee can touch each other the most. And I was thinking, how is Keir Starmer going to work all of this? But I think the reason why it worked is because of the preparation that had gone in before.
I absolutely think that he would have practiced handshakes with various people. Like, what I want to know, who was the handshake practicer with Keir Starmer? Like, someone would have... Harriet, don't you think someone had that job? Like, wouldn't they have practiced this?
they would have choreographed everything down to the most minute detail. Who walks in what order into what room, and, nothing is spontaneous. And no doubt, having had a voice coach, he would have no doubt have a, handshaking discussion, or even the patting on the back, up the arms. I noticed that Macron actually patted Trump on his leg in his thing.
And
I
it was the
a
most dismissive gesture,
I thought
wasn't it, Harriet?
we have gone way beyond him holding Theresa May's hand, which is now forgotten, where they're doing an all-over body frisk. However, it's really all about the preparation. And whatever happened there's a lot of talk about the personal relationship, but actually the personal relationship in foreign affairs and diplomacy is based on substance and national interest and the work of diplomacy ahead of that meeting.
We know that the Starmer team have put a lot of work into this because they knew that they needed to keep Trump on side, and they did loads of stuff after he got elected, but before he was inaugurated, they went over to New York to Trump Tower for that dinner with David Lammy and Keir Starmer. And we know that they sent two the really key aides for Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney, you've heard us talk about him before, Matthew Doyle. They were over at the weekend last weekend, so they spent a week prepping with Trump's team to try and make this go smoothly. But, I mean, presumably, Beth, you were on the plane with the Prime Minister's team on the way over there. Presumably, there's still a lot of nerves in the air. What's it actually like?
When we got on the plane and the PM came up the plane, he came up. There's like 20 plus journalists. There's a lot of questions, and he first started by saying, "I've got very serious issues to discuss. I'm going to keep my answers short." And then he basically danced very carefully through every single question and answer. And he kept saying things like, "I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I don't want to get ahead of the discussions." And everything, it felt like, was a holding pattern where he just did not want to drop the ball at all, or say anything slightly sloppy that could have caused any ructions before he saw Donald Trump. And then that morning, some of the people around him were saying to me that he was in meetings for hours all through the morning, preparing for the lunchtime meet with Donald Trump. So yeah, they were nervous. Until they got into the room with Trump, they didn't really know what Trump's peace plan was. They needed to get in to see him face to face.
That had all along been my nervousness. Would number 10 be able to work out how to deal with somebody who's torn up the rule book on diplomacy? And I think what they might think now is that without being complacent, without taking anything for granted, they have navigated those waters, and they now know that there is a way to deal with Donald Trump. And that is to understand absolutely what is his bottom line and what he's insisting on, and sort that.
Yeah.
So Beth, I know we've talked about, asking a question to Donald Trump and all the rest of it, but even still, and I don't know how your back's holding out doing all this heavy name dropping and heavy lifting that you're doing about having been in the Oval Office 3 or 4 times before. It's become an old hat for you now. But, there must be a moment, just a moment, where you're sort of almost pinching yourself, racking your brains to think of, right, what can I ask the leader of the free world in this room with the curvy walls, with the world's media looking at me? Do you know, even you must smudge your lipstick a little, no?
I tell you what, it is so bloody stressful, the whole thing. It is actually, it is amazing. It is a blessing and a curse. And it is like being at a concert and Madonna is on stage and you really want to get to the front. It is an absolute bun fight, and it's really stressful. And because I've been outside watching the arrivals, by the time I got into the Oval Office press briefing room before we go in, well, I was the back of the queue. So I was like, well, that won't do. So I sort of snuck round, because I'm quite little. So I sort of snuck in, managed to get to the front, because what you need to do is you need to then get in line, and then you run in and the cameras go in, and it is an absolute bundle, and you need to get to the front because you need to be seen, because you need to catch his eye to get the question, right? And so I had 2 tactics. I was like, number 1, when I get in there, I will try and make eye contact with Donald Trump, because then he will see me. And if I smile at him and make eye contact, he might call me. And number two, I'm going to wear a really outlandishly bright, garish jacket so he can't miss me even if he wants to. So that was the tactic. And it did work because I ran in, I got to the front, and you're sort of wedged between like camera crews and all the other journalists and the sofas. And I looked at him and he looked at me and he said, hello. And I said hello, and I was like, bang, boom, right, I'm going to get a question. It was stressful, Ruth, to be honest, but exhilarating.
And do you get it? I mean, do you get why half of America voted for this guy when you see him up close?
So this is what I have found really has given me a lot of food for thought on this trip, because he played that Oval Office brilliantly in the sense of he was charming, he disarmed his audience, and he was charismatic, and he asked lots of questions, allowed people to ask lots of questions. And, you know, like Chris Hope at the front GB News, he looked at me and went, "You've got a nice face, you know, ask a question." Everyone laughed. You know, he opened the letter from King Charles, you know, the letter Keir Starmer gets out of his pocket. Trump reads it. He starts going on about how beautiful Prince Charles is. He holds up the letter. You're not meant to do that, by the way. But anyway, he holds up the letter. He had the room. He had the room with him, and he was compelling. And it made me understand a bit that there is this, you know, smack stroke approach with him, right? So he says tough things and then he's really charming. But on the state visit, though, I thought personally that Starmer played a blinder on that, because President Trump was so delighted. I mean, so delighted. But Ruth, you think that he went too early on it?
Yeah, I do. Like, I think it's that whole tactics versus strategy thing. Like, I think it was a great tactic for this visit. Give him something. You know, the man's a billionaire. He's now in his second run at being the most powerful man in the world. He's got everything. He can buy anything. What can you do for him when you're asking to get things from him? You know, and this was something that the UK government could do. And clearly it went down really well. He was gleeful. He was almost childlike in his joy about having this letter. But it's, like I say, great tactic for getting through that meeting. But was it a great strategy when you know you've got 4 years of having to deal with them, and you're going to have to bring him a treat or a lollipop every single time, and you've only got the one? So, you know, I think it's something that I'm assuming that there would have been conversations in number 10 about, do we do it this time or do we hold it back for the next one? They've obviously made a decision to do it this time. It got them through this meeting. It helped set the tone. They obviously decided that making sure that the first big meeting going well was essential to future relations. But there's a sense that, making him work a bit for it, not just giving him everything, not just putting everything down on the table in front of him first go.
I mean, Trump did love it. I mean, he talked about, he said, you know, it's kind of such an incredible honor for him and the US. He said a number of times, because he brought it up in the press conference as well, no one's ever been invited on a second state visit. You know, he absolutely loved it. The soft power of the royal family when it comes to this president is quite something. Do you think that Starmer was right to offer this up at this moment?
I do. And I think because there'd been speculation about this on both sides of the Atlantic, if he hadn't have done that, there'd have been a danger of it looking rude and wondering why. But I thought that Keir Starmer played it very well with the choreography of handing over the letter. And then when Donald Trump opened it and spoke about it, then Keir Starmer coming back and saying rather coyly, "But you haven't said what your answer is." And, you know, obviously this is something that, you know, Trump loved. But there's a contrast on this between Trump and Keir Starmer, because whilst Trump is interested in all that ceremony and flattery, and that's not really where Keir Starmer's at. You know, he's not into all of that sort of aggrandizement, but he went along with it because clearly it was going to work with Donald Trump. And my goodness, you could see it did.
Yeah, it really did. actually, Ruth, because he held the letter up and he's like, look at Prince Charles's signature. Or sorry,
Yeah.
King Charles. He held the letter up. He said, look at King Charles's signature. We were doing this on the news last night, and we had to look it up because someone said to me, I think he's invited him to Balmoral before the state visit. I'm like, what? Anyway, we looked at the letter, and the letter appears to say, well, no, the letter says something along the lines of, I think you're going to be over soon, so would you like to come up to Balmoral to see me, says King Charles to President Trump, and then we can talk about the state visit. So I think he's got like a double whammy of, he's coming over for a visit later this year to the UK. We'll get a trip to Balmoral. His mother's from Scotland. So the Prime Minister gave him a tartan golf cap in his tartan, family's tartan as a present, right? And then he gets the state visit as well. I mean...
In fact, Balmoral's pretty close to one of his Aberdeenshire golf resorts, so he might be up for a round. So we'll see. We'll see if he ends up playing when he's up there.
Well, he is coming over, and number 10 are delighted, as far as I can tell, from this trip. I messaged someone from number 10 afterwards. I said, how did you think it went? And they sent me loads of green ticks with, NATO, tick, NATO support, tick, Article 5, tick, which is when one of you's attacked, all of you's attacked. He reaffirmed that. Trade talks started, tick, and personal relationship cemented, tick. And then someone else said to me, relieved is an understatement. But look, should we break there? Because actually, I really want Harriet to lift the lid for us on this defence spend decision, this massive moment in which Keir Starmer sort of put us all on a war footing and said that we need a whole society effort in terms of protecting the country. Let's get into that after the break. Well, look, we are back and we want to talk about defence spending and Starmer's decision. But even as we're talking about how successful this trip has done, a big story is breaking back in Westminster with Annelise Dodds, Keir Starmer's international development minister, resigning as a minister. That is quite a big moment. But this is so interesting. This is what she says in her letter, because obviously the decision she was told about on Monday and it was announced on Tuesday. She said to the Prime Minister in her resignation letter, as I stated to you earlier this week, it was imperative that you had a united cabinet behind you as you set off for Washington. Your determination to pursue peace through strength for Ukraine is one I share. It is for that reason that I'm only writing to you now that your meeting with President Trump is over, and 4 days after you informed me of your decision to cut the overseas development assistance to 0.3% of gross national income. So Annelise Dodds quit Harriet. If someone's going to quit, the fact she waited and the fact that she says that she wants the cabinet to be united behind him, that's kind of as good as it gets for a prime minister, isn't it?
Well, it's very characteristic of Annelise, who is a thoroughly principled and decent, loyal person. And I'm very disappointed that she's felt she had to do this. But obviously that's how she feels, because I would have liked to have seen her try and refocus what is left of the development agenda. And there's work to do there because it's such a massive change in the scale. And also to keep alive the arguments for the pathway back to 0.7%. So I'm really disappointed that she's felt she's had to resign. But I think that the truth is that there is such coherence in the cabinet, and Keir Starmer's political management of the cabinet is so absolutely functional and strong that, although I don't want to take away from Annelise on this, actually it won't make any difference to that.
But I mean, it is going to give him some bad headlines, isn't it? Or maybe not. I mean, given that it's popular with the public to cut the aid budget, but you land back from DC, one of your cabinet ministers walks out. It's Not helpful,
Well, I think
is it?
there'll be a lot of sadness amongst Labour MPs and Labour in the party that there's been a resignation in government, and there'll be a lot of sadness that it's Annelise that's resigned. But there is a hard reality, which is that money needed to be found, and it needed to be found really quickly, because when it became clear towards the end of the weekend that actually the defence spending had to go up on a timescale, and therefore there would need to be switch spending that would need to be announced on Tuesday. Therefore, this became the only option.
So Harriet, you're saying that this aspiration about defence had to suddenly be put on a timescale before the US trip. And can you explain why and kind of how it had to be put on that timescale?
What had happened before this visit is that the government had said in the manifesto that they would go from 2.3% of defence spending up to 2.5%, with an ultimate aspiration of going up to 3%. But the government had been absolutely decisive in not giving the decision about when that would happen, with the idea that there might be some more information about when we would reach that 2.5 in the spending review, which is scheduled for later on this spring. So what happened was it became clear towards the end of the weekend, ahead of this visit to President Trump, that Keir Starmer would have to go along not just with this is our aspiration and we're going to do it at some point and we'll tell you later when that might be, that he was going to have the amount of money and when the change was going to happen. And that meant that he would have to do it before the visit. And that meant actually making a decision on spending and announcing it to Parliament in a very short period of time, because this was all decided late in the weekend, then finessed on Monday and announced on Tuesday. And clearly the key cabinet ministers, foreign affairs, defence, treasury, would have known and been involved in this, but the rest of the cabinet didn't. And what happened is there was a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning ahead of Keir Starmer's announcement to Parliament. And as is normal with a cabinet meeting, ministers give their phones in, but they were then taken off to a reading room where they were shown the statement in writing, which said that there was going to be this immediate increase in defence spending up to 2.5, and the financing of it would come wholly from international development. And there was no leaks ahead of it. Normally, with this sort of thing, you would find briefings from the Defence Department crowing about it. You would find briefing from Treasury. The political coherence of this has been absolutely spectacular. There was no briefing at all. Although Labour MPs are very sad about what has been done to development aid budget, they also are bearing in mind that this was necessary in order to make a success of the visit to Trump, and also that development spending, unfortunately, we've never won the argument for development spending. So if you look at the polling figures, 64% of the public think that if you've got to reduce spending on something, 64% would choose development aid. And of course, many of the Labour MPs who care enormously about defence spending nonetheless have reform in second place in their constituencies, know that development aid spending is not popular with the public, and therefore feeling regretful about this move that's had to be made, but not protesting about it publicly.
I mean, Ruth, it is. It is fascinating because, as Harriet was saying, this did actually go down well with the public. You're a Conservative and you see a Labour Prime Minister standing up, cutting foreign aid budgets in order to
40%.
fund defence. It will go down a barnstormer, as Harriet was saying, in those seats where Reform were really chasing Labour on this, and Conservatives telling the Labour Party to step up. I mean, he did do a blinder in the sense of it gave him something to go to Washington with deal maker Donald Trump to say, look, I've heard you on defence spending. I'm coming with asks, but this is my offer. And I was told it delighted the Republicans on Capitol Hill. And it also plays really well with a domestic audience. I mean, look, Ruth, what do you think of it?
I think what Harriet's told us there about this need, that part of the prep work for the meeting was that you need to go on the record now, put your money where your mouth is, and don't just have a vague assurance about defence spending. You need to find it. You need to give us a timescale for it. You need to put your cards on the table on this one, or this trip will not go well for you. That makes it much easier to understand for me as to why they just decided to take all the money out of one budget rather than hedge a bit from here, a bit from there, a bit on increased taxes, a bit on increased borrowing, like that sort of thing, which I think would actually be their natural, their greater disposition. But there is a sense in which, how galling it is remembering when members of the Labour Party were barracking and bellowing in the Commons that the coalition government weren't going fast enough to entrench the 0.7% of GDP as an aid figure and putting it into law and all the rest of it and being dismissive and all the rest of it. And they've just whacked 40% of it. It had already gone down to 0.5%. They now cut it down to 0.3%. The idea that that's just been fire raised by Labour Party is pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. And then but the fact that it was remarkable, and of course it would be disruptive for the Labour Party, even if, as Harriet notes, her colleagues are being very disciplined, it does have reverberations, and there was a resignation over it. I mean, do you think Annelise Dodds had no option but to do what she did?
Well, I mean, by all accounts, Annelise Dodds is a really decent, principled woman. That's the kind of adjectives you always hear about her. And I think she kind of didn't have a choice. And Annelise Dodds has been probably as good a girl as she could have been about all of this, on the grounds that she waited until after he was back. She didn't say a peep. She was only told after the decision had been made. She wasn't involved in the decision at all. She felt that, her position is completely uncredible. And I feel sorry for her because she seems like a really good Labour soldier who Keir Starmer's treated pretty abysmally. So she was brought in after, in his first sort of iteration of shadow cabinet, when he was first elected as leader. She was the shadow chancellor. She lasted a year before he fired her. He then gave her the job of being the party chairman. She ran this amazing election campaign. They had this amazing majority. He fired her the very next day and made her a junior minister. And then he gutted her budget. Like, she had nowhere else to go.
Well, I think she has found it very difficult. But I think that the driver of all of this has been Putin and the change in circumstances that has arisen and the response to that from Donald Trump. And I would have liked to have seen her staying on and actually reconfiguring in a very principled and intelligent way what is left of the aid budget and keeping the flag flying for needing to increase it again when that possibility allows. But I absolutely agree with Ruth that she's not dealt with this. She's not resigned as a way of disrupting, but just because she hasn't felt that she's resigned because she hasn't felt that she was able to carry through with this, which I think is a shame because I would have liked to have seen in these very difficult circumstances somebody who is as committed to development aid as she is actually finding the way forward.
He is ruthless though, isn't he, Harriet? I mean,
I wouldn't say ruthless. I would say focused and recognising what needs to be done. I mean, you've got to be decisive if you're a prime minister. I don't think that's ruthlessness. I think it's what comes with the job. And I think his response to change in circumstances and, really difficult times has been really what was necessary.
And yet the body count still rises, Harriet. Sue Gray, out, humiliated. Annelise Dodds, feeling she can't go on, having been humiliated yet again. There's a lot of women in his wake who thought they had big jobs that have been sidelined under him, hasn't there?
Well, it'll be interesting to see who he puts back. But she was also responsible for women and equality. So I'm assuming, unless that role is given somewhere else into the government, that it might well be a woman taking over. But we'll wait and see.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's got his work cut out again this weekend because Starmer is hosting 18 European leaders in London on Sunday. President Zelensky, who's in DC with President Trump as we're recording, he will be coming to London. He'll be going to Downing Street. Then Prime Minister Meloni of Italy is coming along. And then he's having all of the leaders, Germany, France, the Netherlands, a number of European leaders coming along for this summit in which they're going to discuss Ukraine and a European peace deal. I mean, I have to say, when Brexit happened, this idea that that the UK could be a bridge between the US and the European Union, it felt like that wasn't going to work. But Keir Starmer really does seem to be, and it's not my desire to ever big up any politician. It's my desire to be sceptical at all times, as in tune with doing the job I do. But he really does seem to be stepping into quite a big role at the moment. What do we think about that? Are we seeing a different type of Starmer?
Well, I think what we're seeing is him being really proactive, looking ahead to where events are going and taking action. So actually bringing all these European leaders to Downing Street is absolutely the right thing to be doing. They'll be wanting to talk to each other. They'll be wanting to hear what he's got to say following on his meeting with Trump. It does make me wonder, though, about his Friday nights with his family in the current circumstances. But there we are.
I know. I mean, Ruth, if I'd said to you 6 months ago, Keir Starmer is going to put the UK on a war footing, if you like. He's going to be the convener of the European leaders. He's going to be the guy that is the Trump whisperer. You'd have laughed at me, wouldn't you?
Well, I'll tell you what I would have been concerned about. I would have been concerned about the idea that any prime minister of any sort of political background would commit British men and women in uniform on the ground in Ukraine facing Russian aggressors when there is a détente, and he'll put planes in the skies to police a no-fly zone. And we don't yet know what that deal looks like. And that is, I mean, that is bold to the point almost, I would say, of recklessness. And I would never have expected that from him because he's, in all other areas, seemed quite a cautious person. Sorry, I've digressed a little bit, Beth, and your original question about has Keir Starmer's position been bolstered this week with that trip? I think yes, it has. And I think that he does look like he's grown a bit in office. And the authority that he gets from the aid spending and none of the backbenchers chipping up, the fact that he's got complete authority over that, the fact that he's done quite well in this, he's come back, there's been no gaffes. The issue will be is actually converting that good office and that good opinion into a tangible win. And the jury will be out on that for some time.
Yeah, he might begin to win a bit more credibility with the British public who voted for him and have been unimpressed with him, given how he has handled himself with Trump and showed leadership on Ukraine. It's interesting, though. For me, he does seem to have gone up a gear in recent weeks, like he's been turbocharged by the Trump administration and the change in reality about what allies are facing and having to try and carve out some sort of deal for Ukraine. It does seem to have picked up the pace on his premiership, I would say.
I think the thing that'll be pleasing Number 10 the most was the optics. And the optics were that, Trump treated him like an equal, he treated him well, he was respectful of him. But that actually, to do that, Keir Starmer didn't have to change himself. It was quite an authentic performance from him. He was still quiet, he was still understated. He didn't have to bounce up and down and pat him on the knee and have, 20-minute handshakes and try and out-alpha Trump to be taken seriously by him. And I think that's what will make him look stronger in the public's mind.
I suspect that Trump respects power, and he's seen the power of Keir Starmer making a decision on defence spending, enacting it, and then not having any pushback or any destabilisation. And I think that he would admire that.
Well, who would have thought it? A bromance, as I said earlier, between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. And now we get to enjoy many power handshakes throughout the weekend as all the European leaders come along and they can all handshake and slap each other on the backs. And we will watch more diplomacy in action with Keir Starmer front and centre stage in Europe, which is something, isn't it, in these Brexit years, that suddenly a UK Prime Minister is convening European leaders. I have to say, I did not expect that. Anyway, look, that is all we have time for. But remember, you can get in touch whenever. Voice note us on WhatsApp to the burner phone 07934 200 444. Email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk.
And remember to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and do tell your friends about us too. Come on, let's share the love. Let's share the electoral dysfunction. Love people.
I'll be back in on Sunday, actually, covering this big summit. So if you get your telly boxes on, you'll be able to watch all those handshakes, those hugs. Are you two going to watch it?
Apart from an hour in the middle of the day where I have to take my errant puppy to some remedial obedience classes, yes, I might well do.
Well, look, it's going to be another big weekend. Thank you for listening, and we will be back next week with the latest instalment. And who knows, will there be the beginnings of a peace deal after 3 years of conflict? That's it from us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.